Welcome to Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues, personal and professional trajectories. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. In each episode of this podcast, we chat with energy experts from all around the world. We exchange on timely energy issues as well on their life experience. You will learn a lot whether you are an energy aficionado or a newbie. And one of my favorite parts of this podcast is the focus on their personal stories. I always find it very inspiring. It's November 15, 2019, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today I'm exchanging with Colette Lewiner. Colette has an impressive resume, 4 decades of professional experience working in leadership position in French top electricity nuclear consulting companies. So became in 2012 senior energy advisor to Capgemini chairman, and she also is an independent board director at various companies, including EDF. She has also received numerous honor, and the highest honor in France, Commander in the Legion of Honor and Grand Officer in the Order of Merit. So hi Colette, welcome.
Hi,
It's a
Leslie.
great pleasure to have you on. And we're going to discuss today some of the key findings of Capgemini new released report that you contributed and led, which is the World Energy Markets Observatory. We'll also discuss your amazing path as a woman in energy. So I would like to start by asking you, what is so different about this report that Capgemini is putting together every year compared to other reports that we see from, for instance, from the International Energy Agency on their outlook for the world energy?
Thank you, Leslie. So, our World Energy Market Observatory, we are the 21st edition, and now it is worldwide. It was European to start with. So, what's different? I think that we looked more in detail to issues related to energy generation, electricity generation, also strategic issues, and the position of the big companies in this space. This year, what was the most striking, I think, is two things. First, that the climate change goals are threatened because in 2018, so it's an observatory, so we look at the past, but we look also what this means for the future. So in 2018, the greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, but other gases as well, have increased significantly by 2%. More than in 2017, and in the previous years it was a plateau. It did not increase. So this is worrying because to achieve what was the Paris Accord agreement, in order to maintain the rise of the global temperature of our planet to only 2 degrees, which is already significant, but only 2 degrees, we would need to see a decrease of those emissions. And we see exactly the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so it has become a wide consensus that most countries will not hit Paris climate goals. What are the solutions? And I think in the report you're mentioning also that India and China are part of the largest increase in their greenhouse gas
so I would
emissions.
say the different regions behave differently. Europe, I would say, is a good student in a class that is not good in general, but Europe is the best, I would say. We are going to achieve our 2020 objective of decreasing the greenhouse emissions of 20% compared to 1990. And I want to stress that Europe has chosen 1990 as a reference, which is more difficult than the US, for example, that have chosen 2005, because in between 1990 and 2005, the emissions have grown. So Europe has chosen a low year of emissions. So we're going to achieve this. Of course, the US is growing, but not so much. Of course, the worrying part of the world is China and India. China is the first emitter worldwide, and India is growing significantly. Why? Because they have a lot of fossil fuel generation, including coal, and that there is a rising level of standards of living, so which is good for the people. But they are emitting per capita, China is emitting per capita half of what the US is emitting. So if you think that if there is no efforts there, they will get to the same amount of greenhouse gases emission per capita. And of course, there is a billion of people in China. So it means that there is no hope at all to restrict the increase of the global temperature.
And do you see them remaining highly dependent on coal-fired plants, or do we see a political move to move away from coal, from the financing of coal generation, and to maybe switch to natural gas or renewable at the
I would
same
say the
time?
two countries are different. India has a very basic need to provide electricity to all Indian people. And by any means, I would say, including, of course, oil, gas, and coal. So you know that on our planet, we have still 1,600,000,000 people that don't have access to electricity in countries like India and in Africa, of course. So this is the goal of the Indian government. The Chinese government is doing efforts to reduce its greenhouse gases emissions and is developing quickly renewables, nuclear that don't emit greenhouse gases. But because of the increase of population, which is stabilizing, by the way, and the increase of standard of living, they need more electricity. So they use all sorts of sources. But China is conscious. China has a very big problem of air pollution. The sky is no longer blue in China. It's gray all the time because of, yes,
Similar in India, by the way. I think yesterday kids couldn't get out, and they had no school because of too
yeah,
much air pollution
yes,
in the
especially
largest
Delhi. Yes, that's
cities.
totally true. So China is starting to master this problem. And in Beijing, I understood that now the pollution has decreased. So they are very conscious of that and they try to do things. And it's a very centralized country. So we can think that there will be progress. India is still backwards on this side, but it's a democracy, which is good as well, and has a population that will surpass Chinese population in the years coming. India is a sort of concern.
Yeah, and I like in the report the fact that you highlights the fact that both companies are growing emerging economies, but with two different distinct strategies towards climate change
Yes,
and energy
yes,
access.
because they don't have the same problems, and also because their system, their government system, is totally different. India is democracy, which is good, but meaning that decisions are very difficult to get implemented, which is the contrary in China. So this explains also if you're in China, it can be much more efficient in the national policy than India.
And so India, you mentioned also in the report, has an 100%
Yes.
electrification program. They also have some goals for smart cities. Where is the electricity going to come from
In India today, it's
predominantly?
mainly by far fossil fuel electricity. And if you look at 2017, which is the latest statistics that we have, is 74% coming from coal for electricity generation. So it's very dominant still. They still do they are launching big solar plants on renewables. They have nuclear plants that are not emitting CO2, but still it's mainly fossil fuel. And China is a little bit less coal. It's only 67% coal, and China has hydropower, which is good, and they also have wind, solar, and nuclear. I was in China 1.5 years ago. You can see windmills all over. Well, at least where I was in the south of China, so they're all doing that, but they need massive amounts of electricity. I think on this side, coal is something nobody wants to talk about anymore. And a lot of investment companies don't want to finance coal. I think that's okay for developed countries, Europe. Okay, we are in France, we are phasing out coal. Germany will finally phase out its coal in 2038. Poland as well. Okay, but for the developing country, they still need it. So I think instead of doing that, we should progress in clean coal technologies, and including the coal extraction, including the way it is burned in the plants, including what's called carbon capture and storage, capturing the CO2 and doing storage. It's too expensive today, but I'm not sure enough efforts is put in this sector.
Yeah, very interesting, because we hear a lot about
Mm.
decarbonizing gas. We hear
Mhm.
less about decarbonizing coal, except maybe, in China,
Okay.
sometimes in the US, we hear about it
Yeah.
with carbon capture and sequestration. But yeah, clean coal, do you
I
think clean
think it's
coal has a
needed.
future?
Yeah, I think it has a future. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's too expensive. No doubt that carbon capture and storage or sequestration is too expensive. But if you want, the right signals are not given by the governments or the regulators. I mean, if we would have a carbon price
Mm-hmm.
high enough, those technology would become competitive. In Europe,
Yeah.
the carbon price has gone up a lot. It was at a ridiculous level of €7 per ton. It went to now I think it's around 25, so it went out a lot. But to get those
Mm-hmm.
technology become competitive, you need a carbon price of around I would say 70 to 80. So there's still to do,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully the technologies will have
Yeah.
decreasing costs. So
So one of the big takeaways from the report is that we don't see sufficient
yes,
immediate policy actions. Another thing that you've been looking into is the need for scalable energies that to partner
yeah.
with solar and wind to make our energy
Mhm.
systems reliable and predictable. Which partner do you see with renewables? I
Yeah,
mean,
it depends
obviously
on
it
the
will
countries.
depend
I
on the
think
country, the
we need
region.
the
Yeah.
problem of renewables like wind and solar. It's not true for hydro. Hydro is a great renewable because then you can it's a schedulable if you want source of energy, because you can always open the dams and have the water flow and get electricity when you need it. Of course, it's not true with
Mm,
wind and solar. At night, you don't have any photovoltaic solar generation. Huh? So they are per nature intermittent. And grids with only intermittent generation, you cannot manage them, because you need to balance at each moment consumption with generation. And so when you have a high consumption, you need the high generation. And if it's at night, you don't have solar. So what to do? I think one thing is to have, as you say, a schedulable type of generation. Nuclear is good in some countries because it does not emit at all greenhouse gases. The natural gas emits CO2, and also the gas itself is quite polluting gas on the climate change side, but it's much less emitting than coal. So it can be a way to balance. So this is one way. And in addition to that, you can mitigate this by using storage. Now, storage
mhm.
in dams is, of course, the way you can store a lot of electricity. Storage in batteries have costs that are decreasing because they are, if you want, driven by car batteries. A lot of efforts are done on car batteries. But today, the volumes of battery
Mhm.
you would need to store electricity for 1 month are out of reach. It's not critical. So progress in
Mhm.
batteries will help. And then on the midterm, I think hydrogen, the green hydrogen, not the hydrogen produced with
Yeah.
gas, but hydrogen produced out of water. The green hydrogen will have cost decreasing, and with hydrogen you can store big amounts of electricity. So I think you have to
Mhm.
think of a combination. People used to think we want one sort of energy. No, I think you need an energy mix and and storage today.
And do you see the future of natural gas and maybe the infrastructure of natural gas still relevant for storage, like pipelines and
It's true that you can
underground
store
storage?
gas. I think it depends on the regions. In Europe, the forecasts are
Mhm.
that gas consumption will stabilize, will not grow. Huh? In other countries,
Mhm.
of course, if you replace coal by gas, as it has been done in the US massively, because gas is cheap, huh? You also you improve
Right.
a lot your climate change issues. So there is a future for gas. Now, in Europe, the gas infrastructure, you have two types of infrastructures. The big pipelines that bring gas from gas-producing countries, and in Europe it's mainly Russia. You still have Norway, you still have others, but it's mainly Russia. Those you can have question mark because there is a competition with what's called LNG, liquefied natural gas. And for example, the US is exporting now, thanks to shale gas, LNG to Europe. So how much you will need of both types of sources has to be thought about. Now, the distribution pipelines, if you have a decreasing gas demand, you don't need more, at least. Some people say they could become stranded assets in the future. There is a risk here. In other regions of the world, I think this is not true and that gas will develop.
And something else that the report is mentioning is that the pace of renewable growth will depend also not only on cost and equipment, but also on public acceptance, sales agreement, and financing.
Yes, so
can you unpack
if you think about wind onshore, in countries like France, but in Europe in general, which are quite densely populated countries, there is a local opposition to wind onshore. So some projects take a lot of time to get approved. So there are.
And is it mostly related to the landscape or the fears that birds will be killed?
It's
what
a
is
bit
exactly
of everything: landscape, birds, noise, also. But the manufacturers are doing great job to reduce noise. So it's a bit of a combination, and people's, it's not in my backyard sort of thing as well, and it's very visible. So this is one that has to be overcome, and it has, I would say, soft costs opposed to hard costs that are the equipment. The second thing is financing. Today, financing is great because there is a lot of money and the interest rates are sometimes even negative, so money doesn't cost and it's not a problem. In the future, if interest rates go up, it could become more tense or more costly. Now, agreements, commercial agreements, in Europe, we are seeing what has developed quite a lot in the US, PPAs, price purchase agreements, where some companies like Microsoft or Google or those companies, GAFA, that want to show that they are quote unquote green, will buy at a defined price the production of, for example, an onshore wind farm. So for the farm, it gives quite stable revenue, and it helps a lot financing the project. Now, in Europe, what we see, and this is coming in the US as well, development of offshore wind. This because of those public opinion problems, and because also a lot of good sites to build that have already been used. Offshore wind is more costly, more complex, but doesn't have those public opinion problems.
And very interesting section in the report is about the geopolitics of energy. We usually think about geopolitics of oil, of gas, but not that much of renewable yet. But it has the potential to spark international trade tensions. So should we be concerned about the fact that China is becoming a leader in solar panel production, but also controlling the supply chain of
I think we
rare
could,
earth elements?
because first of all, China has pushed its domestic manufacturing of solar panels, and in a bit more than 1 year ago, they have decreased the subsidies they give to solar because they had too much. Solar is very decentralized project, so very difficult to master them and to forecast them. So at the end, those subsidies were costing too much, so they decreased them, and as a consequence, the projects have decreased very significantly. So now a solar panel industry that is, they have overcapacity, and they're of course ready to flood all other countries, Asia to start with, but Europe as well, with cheap solar panels. And this is contributing to the decrease of the costs of photovoltaic. In the US, the administration has put tariffs and significant tariffs to relocalize the solar panels production inside the US, parts of the government policy. So, but this is one point I think quite well known or whatever. Which is less well known is that the fact that China is the first and by far producers of rare earths and rare metals. Those rare earths and rare metals are crucial in a lot of equipment related to energy transition, in batteries, iPhones, batteries, with lithium,
like
also
our iPhones.
in engines for the wind offshore, for example. So why does this situation happen? China has only 35% of the world reserves of those elements, but their production is quite polluting. And little by little, Western countries let China take this production. In France, we had a plant, I remember, in the west of France, producing rare earths, but it was very polluting. So at the end of the day, we closed it, and it's China doing that. So I think Western world was not really conscious of what they were doing. Now consciousness has started. The US have a strategic plan to do a few things. First, recycle more those elements, which is not easy. Second, find substitute to them. For example, you have some of them in the ashes of coal. And third, also open mines, authorize opening of mines. Domestic lithium, yes. Because China is not the first producer of lithium as such, but they are acquiring mines abroad. They acquired, for example, a Canadian mine not so far ago, and they are producing all the in-between steps of the manufacturing supply chain.
Yeah, and what has been interesting in the trade war between the US and China is that China applied punitive duty on US LNG, for example, that went from 10% to 25%. And in the same discussion, Beijing had mentioned the prospect of restricting rare earth exports. It didn't happen, I think, at the end, but it's interesting that, the carrot and stick approach, transactional approach, can also backfire.
That's totally true. It's difficult for them to do an embargo. Well, anyhow, embargoes rarely function very well, huh? But what they can do, they can increase the prices very significantly. This is very clear. Now, on the geostrategy part as well, thanks to shale oil and shale gas, the US has become the first oil producer, a big gas exporter, and it is independent from the Middle East, and from the OPEC countries. So today, the US administration can put sanctions on countries like Iran, for example, which would have been very difficult otherwise, and on Venezuela as well. So you can see how much this energy policies and geostrategy questions are interrelated.
Absolutely. And to finish on the questions regarding the report, Colette, you've been looking also at the traditional utilities and how they've been adapting to the new energy system. Are they going to be able to, do they have right now the right shape to convey the energy transition? Some of them are not in such financial shape. Who are the best positioned kind of companies?
It's very interesting. It's a very interesting question, but very complex. Financially, if you compare US and Europe, US utilities are in a far better financial situation than the Europeans. That's very clear. Europeans had to adapt to big liberalization of the market, and they're introducing a lot of competition, lowering price, etc. So they have less good financial results by far. Now, the US utilities are generally small, which is limiting if you want their action, while the European ones are big. And what's I think significant is that oil and gas companies are entering this business. This is not the first time they try to do that. They tried 20 years ago, but then they stopped. But they are doing this, I think, for one reason, which is again climate change related, is that their shareholders are asking them to become greener. And it's a way to become greener to invest in renewables, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So all of them, Shell wants to be the first utility in the world, Total in
Yeah.
France is doing things, BP, etc. So if you want, the players in this ground field are changing. It's not only the traditional utilities, you have very big players as those guys.
Mm-hmm.
So the traditional utilities, of course, they are changing, but probably they need to change even faster. They are sometimes sort of old style companies, not very quick and not adapting quickly new technologies. They are doing that. They are all investing in renewables, all of them, including in France, including in Europe in general, in Netherlands, for example, in Spain, in Italy. They are becoming more international, which is a real challenge, not really easy. But
Yeah.
if you take Enel, which the Italian utilities is, its revenue is more than 50% outside Italy now. So they are moving and they are getting into the space of services where they find another type of competitors, which are the GAFA. Google, Amazon, those guys have Alexia or Google Home, and
What is
they
that?
really
Yeah.
want to get into
Oh,
the
yeah.
home space.
Mm-hmm.
Or they are, not the one, they are. So utilities have to adapt, have
Right.
to be quicker in what they are doing,
Yeah.
have to be more also open to different requests from their clients. I would say they are doing it, some quicker than others, but I think they have to accelerate.
Very interesting. So that's a good transition, Colette, to your personal and professional trajectory because you know well the utilities. So tell us about a little bit more about your trajectory. You work for different companies, utilities, and then consulting.
Yeah.
But you were
First, I
also
have
one
a
of the first
scientific
women in the
background. I am
space.
PhD in
And how
physics,
was that
even
for you?
it's a long time ago. I think this helped me quite.
And I should add that you
Yes,
had
yes.
one of the best French
Yeah.
education, which is you
Yeah.
went to École
So I think
Normale
this helped
Supérieure,
me in
which
this
is
world,
also
which is
a
still a
very
technical
high
world
degree.
and a world of engineers, mainly. Well, if you want to look at the women's side of the story, you already recalled my bio in general. I would say it's. I would say first of all, it is possible. I think for women, this is the most important thing. It is possible to have a career, whatever sector in, and raise your children. And we have now 10 grandchildren. So I mean, thank you. But it's something possible. It's hard work,
Congratulations. Yeah.
double if you want double work at home and at work. You're always not satisfied. You leave your home, your office too early in the evening, but you get home too late because you have a lot to do at home. Need to take care of course, children education.
Mhm.
So if you accepted to do that, and I would say if your family is in a good health, the family is okay. If this balance between personal life and work life, you succeed in maintaining a balance, never perfect, a sort of balance. I say it's possible, and I would even say something that usually women don't say. After you have gone through certain up to certain levels, you become a sort of exception. So it's easier for you. It becomes easier. It's a paradox to say that.
Mhm.
You're, yeah, yeah, you're the only woman in the room, so sometimes
Because
not so
you're the only
nice. But
woman
I
in the
mean,
room,
people
or
remember you. People have sort of admiration because they didn't see so many women do that. No, it was
right.
more true at my generation. It's less true now. But I think this is a positive effect. And men today
Mhm.
don't want to work only with men. They want to have a diversity at work and they are happy to have it. So I think it's possible. Also, the way of managing today is,
Yeah.
at least in many, many companies, but not all of them, it is more, I would say, quote unquote, a feminine way of doing things. Communication is important. You need to persuade people. You're not going to give orders all
Mhm.
the day, to them. All the communication, external image are very important for
Mhm.
all companies, whatever companies are. And I think for this, women are very good. So they have
Yeah.
a lot of
Mhm.
positives assets that they can play with.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing this perspective. It's very interesting. And you have also become a board member at very prestigious
In
companies.
many companies, yes.
Were you when you
My
started
first
the first
external
woman
boards, I
on the
were on
board?
boards of the subsidiaries of EDF, for example. But if I think of external boards, I started 15 years ago, and at that time in French board, I was the only woman, which was not so nice, I would say, yeah, because you were not taken seriously enough. For example, in the minutes of the meetings, huh, in one
Yeah,
company, I will not say the name, huh, I could speak at the minutes. All the other
yeah,
board members were quoted. I was never quoted. So I thought I don't speak loud
yeah.
enough. And then I shared that with other women on boards. I went
Interesting.
to an
Yeah,
international gathering, and some other women said the same thing. Then, so I
yeah,
said, okay, that's not only my personality; it's the fact that women are not yet taken seriously. But this is in Europe, and especially in France, where we have quotas, it has totally changed.
yeah. Interesting. So yeah, sometimes I mean, or you're being heard, but somebody else repeat
Exactly.
what you
More
just have
credibility. Yeah.
said when a
You
woman
don't
says
have
it.
to be
Yeah,
shy, huh? If you are the only
yeah,
one, sometimes you think I will ask
yeah,
stupid questions. But those questions, all the other male board members don't have the answer. But they don't dare asking the question. Sort of out of the box thinking that
yeah.
the man not always dare
Yeah.
saying.
So do you think in big companies like Capgemini or others now there is more
I
understanding
think
how
it's better
women or
understood.
diversity in
There are
general,
also
the
regulations now
benefit
in
of having
France,
it?
at least, in other countries like Nordic countries, which were in Europe, were the first ones doing that.
Hmm.
So there is a regulation. There is an obligation to report on that, for example, in France. But still, there are efforts to do on both sides. On the men's side, to consider for a new position, a high position, to systematically, if you want, think that a woman could do that, consider female candidates, and also on the women's side,
Hmm.
because a woman has different values in life, huh? Usually, huh? Not all related to her work. They have values related to the
Yeah.
balance of their personal life, family, etc. And if they have a nice position, they're happy in that, why
Hmm.
to want to be promoted? I have many cases on that, many where women say, "Oh no, promotion, I don't need it now." Huh? And
Hmm.
this is a wrong way of thinking because men are not thinking like that. And if you want, companies are
Hmm.
a lot driven by
Yeah.
men values still. Know?
Right. Well, Colette, thank you so much for your time and being here today
Yeah,
with us.
with pleasure. Thank you
And
very much,
I hope
Leslie.
we'll have you for maybe for
Thank
the
you.
next release next year or before. That concludes our Energy Vista podcast, which was recorded on November 15, 2019. This is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day and good luck.